The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in China, aiming to put relations between the countries on a steadier footing. Mr. Blinken has been in Shanghai holding meetings with business leaders. He's now heading to Beijing for talks with the Foreign Minister Wang Yi. Although tensions have eased since last year, disagreements on issues such as trade and security remain. I want to speak to our China correspondent Stephen McDonald, who is in Beijing for us. So there's been a cordial note to begin with, a bit of diplomacy over basketball, but there's a lot at stake, isn't there? Yes, I mean, it's interesting you say that tensions have eased since last year, and yet in the last 7 days or so, it's like they've been ramping back up again, and that's partly because Antony Blinken, before he came here, accused China of being the major sponsor of Russia and its war in Ukraine. And of course, the government in Beijing responded very angrily to this. And so we might expect that when the U.S. Secretary of State finally makes it to Beijing here for his talks with Wang Yi, his Chinese counterpart, and even possibly with Xi Jinping, we don't know that yet, that they'll be talking about these tense matters, and possibly quite candidly. Yeah, I mean, you'd like to be a fly on the wall to actually have a listen to that, actually. And I mean, some of the issues, including support for Russia and Ukraine. Tell us about that and other hot topics on the agenda. Yeah, so I mean, many hot topics wherever you turn, they've got stuff they don't agree with, and in fact, issues that bring quite a bit of tension. The U.S. ban on TikTok, U.S. providing military support to Israel, U.S. providing military support to Taiwan, China providing support to Russia. I mean, then that's before even you get to trade and all these questions of blocking microchips and other technologies which could be used in military applications. Now, that said, both sides are still trying to make quite some effort on this trip to also generate goodwill. Antony Blinken went to a basketball game here, apparently a very close game. The Zhejiang pipped Shanghai by 1 point, and then when he met the Shanghai Communist Party chief, he mentioned, "Are you at the basketball last night?" So that sort of stuff brings about goodwill. And in the meeting between those two leaders, I mean, I could just give you a quick flavor of it. Chen Jining, the Shanghai Party secretary, said that whether China and the U.S. choose cooperation or confrontation, it will affect the well-being of both peoples, both nations, and also the future of humanity. And then Antony Blinken responded saying, "We have an obligation to our people, an obligation to the world to manage the relationship between our countries." And certainly other world leaders will be looking to this meeting and looking to the relationship in general between China and the U.S. to see if they can establish some stability, at least on the trade front, because the global economy frankly needs it. Stephen McDonald, thank you very much indeed. I want to speak now to Yuka Kobayashi, a lecturer on China and international politics at SOAS. Thank you very much indeed for being with us. So how would you describe the current U.S.-China relationship? I think the U.S.-China relationship is really at a tension point at the moment. You actually saw the bill over Senate of aid to Taiwan, which has actually been kind of one of the sore spots between U.S. and China, given that U.S. has a one China policy, and China sees Taiwan as inherently part of their sovereign state. So essentially, this is actually one of the key hot areas that will be really a discussion in the meeting tomorrow. I think this is actually looking more and more like a very tense Cold War-like scenario. If you look at the most recent Ministry of Foreign Affairs statement on Blinken's visit from the Chinese government, you'll see that there are 3 main points that are raised in the statement, which is basically about perception and conversation and management of disagreements. And you can see that it's going to be a very long, difficult meeting that Mr. Blinken has with Wang Yi tomorrow. And how much more probably is it on the economic side? I mean, there's, for example, the prospect of further tariffs on Chinese imports and restrictions on China's access to advanced semiconductors. How much of that will be part of the conversation this time around? I think economy has been one of the key issues around U.S.-China relations. So you can see that back to the Trump administration when you had the U.S.-China trade war. But it's always been an issue, and you can see it again arise with, Blinken's visit in Shanghai when he met a businessman there, in that sense of like they're emphasizing a level playing field and essentially having this kind of fair trade with China. And you can see that we're also seeing a point where we have economic security very high in the agenda for both sides in the sense of what we do with supply chain resilience. So uh, you're actually seeing a complex factor of one ensuring smoother trade relations between the two, but one we're actually seeing a very different kind of shift in regime shift in trade, where we actually see a very uh, different scenario for what we saw when we were under globalization. What about the issue of Ukraine? I mean, one of the aims appears to be to try and persuade China not to send the components to Russia that can then be used in the war in Ukraine. How likely are they to be able to discourage the Chinese from doing that? It's a very difficult issue given that, yeah, China and Russia are very solid in their kind of relationship. And given that you see from the Chinese government about perception and misunderstanding overly repeated, you're going to have a very tough discussion around issues around Ukraine and trying to kind of unpack this kind of complex relations, what you see with US and China, but you actually see Russia on the sidelines, given that you actually see this kind of revival of a Cold War kind of scenario. And you can see this also in the statement that China released that, it does raise issues like AUKUS. So lots of discussion about containment of China, lots of discussion around this kind of Cold War-like language. So it is a very tough conversation that we see ahead tomorrow. But I'm hopeful that, both sides are talking about conversation and both sides are talking about managing this important relationship.